She thought the worst thing that could happen at the Christmas party was seeing her ex, until a dangerous stranger took her hand and made the entire room afraid to look at her again. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe. She almost didn't go. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror for a long time, one hand braced against the sink, the other smoothing down the fabric of a dark green dress she'd bought months ago and never worn. It wasn't too revealing. It wasn't too modest. It was the kind of dress meant for a woman who had somewhere to belong. Tonight, she wasn't sure she did. The invitation still sat open on her phone on the counter behind her. Annual holiday celebration. Guests welcome. Guests welcome. Not required. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to straighten. If she didn't go, she'd spend the night alone on her couch, scrolling through photos she pretended not to care about. If she did go, she'd spend the night pretending she didn't care about something much worse. Him. By the time she arrived at the hotel ballroom, she already regretted her decision. Warm light spilled through tall glass doors, reflecting off gold ornaments and strands of white Christmas lights draped across the ceiling. Laughter floated out into the hallway, easy, paired, confident. The kind that came from people who had someone to lean toward when they spoke. She paused just outside the entrance, fingers tightening around the small clutch in her hand. Every table inside seemed to confirm her fear. Couples, familiar hands resting on familiar backs, husbands adjusting ties, boyfriends leaning down to whisper something that made their partners smile. Even coworkers she barely knew had brought someone. She slipped inside quietly, trying not to draw attention, and made her way toward the bar. The bartender smiled kindly, the way people did when they clocked that you were alone but pretending not to be. "Red or white?" he asked. "Red," she replied, though she hadn't really tasted wine since the breakup. She took a small sip once the glass was in her hand and scanned the room, heart sinking with every familiar face. Decorations sparkled. Music played softly. The air smelled like pine and citrus and expensive perfume. And then she saw him. He stood near the center of the room, relaxed, laughing easily, one arm draped around a woman in a silver dress. Tall, confident, effortless. The same man who'd once told her she was too sensitive when she asked him not to disappear for days at a time. Her ex. Her stomach tightened painfully. She turned away immediately, focusing on the condensation sliding down her wine glass. She reminded herself she didn't care. She reminded herself she was over it. She reminded herself she had survived worse than a work party. But memories were cruel things. They didn't wait to be invited. She remembered last Christmas, the promise he'd made to come over after dinner, the text hours later saying something came up, the way she'd waited anyway. Laughter erupted behind her. She flinched. "Did you come alone?" a coworker asked casually, appearing at her side. "Yes," she answered too quickly. "Oh," the woman said, glancing around. "Well, you look great." It was meant kindly. It still stung. She smiled, nodded, and excused herself, weaving toward the edge of the room. She told herself she'd stay 15 minutes. 20 max. Long enough to be seen. Long enough to prove she hadn't been broken by the past. That was when she felt it. That subtle shift in the air. The kind you didn't notice consciously. Just the way conversation dipped, the way heads turned, the way laughter softened into something more careful. She didn't know why she looked up, but she did, and across the room, through the glow of Christmas lights and clinking glasses, she met the gaze of a man she had never seen before. He stood near the far wall, dark suit immaculate, posture relaxed in a way that suggested nothing ever truly threatened him. His expression was unreadable, calm, controlled, dangerous in a way she couldn't explain. His eyes met hers, and held. Not curious, not amused. Intent. Her breath caught for reasons she didn't understand. He didn't smile, didn't look away, didn't pretend not to notice her the way everyone else seemed to. He looked at her like she existed in a room that had suddenly gone very quiet. She looked down quickly, heart racing, telling herself it was nothing. Just a stranger. Just coincidence. Just nerves. Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. Too close. "Well, well," her ex said lightly. Didn't expect to see you here alone. Her shoulders stiffened. She turned slowly, forcing a polite expression onto her face, already bracing herself for whatever came next. And across the room, the dangerous stranger took his first step toward her. He didn't give her time to escape. Her ex stepped closer, angling his body just enough to block her path without making it obvious. He still held a drink in his hand, ice clinking softly as he swirled it, the casual confidence in the gesture making her stomach tighten. He looked good. Of course he did. Tailored suit, relaxed smile, the same one he used when he wanted people to believe he was charming instead of cruel. "Well," he said again, eyes flicking deliberately to the empty space beside her. "Alone for the holidays?" She forced her shoulders back. "I'm not alone. I'm at a party." He laughed softly, the sound low and knowing. "You know what I mean." She did, and he knew she did. She took a small step sideways, trying to create space. He mirrored it effortlessly, keeping her boxed in near a tall cocktail table decorated with fake snow and silver ornaments. "You always hated these things," he continued, as if reminiscing. "Crowds, small talk, watching other people be settled." His gaze dipped meaningfully. "I'm surprised you came." "I work here," she replied evenly. "So do you." "True," he said, "but I brought someone." She followed his gaze despite herself. The woman in the silver dress stood laughing with a group near the bar, one manicured hand resting possessively on his jacket when he caught her eye. She smiled, confident, unbothered. The familiar ache bloomed in her chest. "That didn't take long," her ex added lightly. "I remember how you used to worry you'd end up alone. Guess you were right." The words slid under her skin with practiced precision. She lifted her chin. "Is that why you came over here? To gloat?" "To check on you," he corrected smoothly. "You know me. I worry." She almost laughed. "You didn't worry when you stopped answering my calls," she said quietly, "or when you told me I was imagining things." His smile didn't falter. "You were always a little dramatic." There it was, the familiar dismissal, the subtle rewriting of history that made her question her own memory. "I just don't want you embarrassing yourself," he continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "People notice these things. Showing up alone, hovering near the bar, it's sad." Her cheeks burned, not because he was right, but because she could feel eyes on them now. Coworkers pretending not to listen. The shift in energy when discomfort crept into a room. She glanced around instinctively, and that was when she felt it again. That presence. Across the room, the dark-haired stranger had moved closer. Not rushing, not watching openly. Just closer than before. Like gravity slowly tightening its pull. Her ex followed her gaze and scoffed. "What, that guy?" he smirked. "Don't tell me you're hoping someone will swoop in and save you." "I'm not hoping for anything," she said, though her voice betrayed her. "Sure," he replied. "You always wanted a fairy tale." He leaned in slightly, breath warm with alcohol. "Face it, I was the best you were going to get. And you couldn't even hold on to me." Something inside her cracked, not loudly, but enough to hurt. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, to say something sharp and clever that would prove she hadn't been destroyed by him. Nothing came. The silence stretched. Her ex smiled wider, sensing victory. "Look at you," he murmured. "Still quiet when it matters." That was when another voice cut through the moment, low, calm, and utterly uninterested in her ex's performance. "That's enough." Both of them turned. The stranger stood beside her now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't touched her. He didn't need to. Her ex blinked, thrown off. "Excuse me?" The man's gaze never left her ex's face. "You're done." There was something in his tone that made the words less like a request and more like a statement of fact. Her ex laughed awkwardly. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," the man replied. The room felt suddenly very quiet. Her ex straightened, trying to reclaim control. And you are? The stranger finally shifted his attention to her. Are you all right? He asked softly. The gentleness of the question, offered without expectation, nearly undid her. She nodded once. That's all I needed, he said. Then, without looking back at her ex, he turned slightly and extended his hand to her. Come with me. The music swelled. Christmas lights glittered overhead, and for the first time that night, she didn't feel small. She took his hand. The laughter didn't explode. It crept. Soft at first, uncertain. The kind that came from people who weren't sure if they were supposed to find something funny but didn't want to be the odd one out. A few co-workers nearby glanced at her, then at her ex, then away again, smiles tight and eyes a little too bright. Someone chuckled behind a glass of champagne. Another laugh followed, higher, brittle. It was worse than silence. Her face burned as awareness settled in. They had heard him. Maybe not every word, but enough. Enough to know she was the punchline of a joke she hadn't agreed to be part of. She could feel herself shrinking under it. Her shoulders pulled inward without her permission, her spine bending just slightly, as if her body remembered too well what it meant to endure instead of resist. Her ex noticed immediately. That smile, sharp, satisfied, curved his lips as he lifted his drink in a mock toast toward the small audience that had formed. Relax, he said lightly. We're just reminiscing. The stranger's hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and steady, but she hadn't moved yet. She stood frozen between humiliation and escape, between wanting to disappear and wanting to scream. She hated that he could still do this to her. Hated that one sentence from him could unravel weeks of quiet healing. Hated that the laughter made her doubt herself again, whispering that maybe she really was too much, too sensitive, too easy to dismiss. Her ex leaned in closer, voice low. See? No hard feelings. We can still joke. The stranger's fingers tightened around hers, just slightly. A warning. Step back, he said calmly. Her ex scoffed. You're making a scene. You already did, the stranger replied. The room felt off-kilter now. Conversations had stalled. People pretended to check their phones or sip their drinks, curiosity warring with discomfort. No one intervened. No one ever did. Her chest felt tight, breath shallow. She was aware of everything at once, the heat of the lights, the faint pine scent from the decorations, the way her heart thudded too loudly in her ears. Then, without warning, the music stopped. The sudden silence snapped through the room like a held breath finally released. And then, a different song began, slower, deeper, a low, steady rhythm that didn't belong to background noise or polite mingling. It was deliberate, intimate, the kind of music meant for bodies that moved together. Heads turned toward the DJ booth. Someone must have changed it. The stranger didn't look surprised. He turned fully toward her, placing one hand at her waist. Not possessive, not tentative, certain, grounding. Dance with me, he said quietly. Her heart stuttered. What? Dance, he repeated, already guiding her forward. The audacity of it stole the breath from her lungs. Here, now, in front of everyone. Her ex laughed again, sharper this time. You can't be serious. The stranger didn't even acknowledge him. She felt exposed, every eye suddenly on them. But beneath that fear was something else, something dangerous and thrilling. Seen, not as an object of pity, not as someone to be mocked, chosen. She began, but the music swelled, wrapping around them, and the stranger's hand firmed at her back. You're safe, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Look at me. She did. His expression was unreadable, calm in a way that made the room feel less real, like everything outside the space between them no longer mattered. Her feet moved almost without her consent. Slow, controlled. One step, then another. The room seemed to recede as he drew her closer, their bodies aligning with the rhythm. She could feel the strength in him, the way people instinctively shifted out of his path as they began to move across the floor. The laughter stopped. Not because the moment was funny, because it wasn't. It was something else entirely. Her ex stood frozen near the bar, drink forgotten, smile gone. For the first time that night, he looked uncertain. Small. She felt it then, the shift. This wasn't just a dance, it was a message, and everyone in the room understood it. As the stranger guided her effortlessly, his voice brushed her ear. "Breathe," he said. "I've got you." And for the first time since she walked into the party, she believed it. It happened so smoothly, she almost missed the moment when everything changed. 1 second, she was standing there with the echo of laughter still ringing in her ears, her pulse racing, her thoughts tangled in old wounds. The next, the stranger shifted. Just a step. Just enough. And placed himself squarely between her and her ex. No shove, no raised voice, no dramatic gesture. And yet the space around them went utterly still. Her ex faltered mid-sentence, his mouth opening as if to continue whatever cutting remark he'd planned. The words never came. The stranger didn't glare or threaten. He simply stood there, tall and immovable, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested he had never needed to prove himself to anyone in this room. The silence spread outward, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations nearby tapered off. A laugh died in someone's throat. Even the music felt quieter, as if it were waiting. "Is there a problem?" the stranger asked calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Low, controlled. The kind of voice that didn't compete for attention because it didn't have to. Her ex scoffed, trying to recover. "This is between me and her." The stranger tilted his head slightly, eyes cool and assessing. "It was," he said, "until you made it public." Something in his tone made the words land harder than they should have. She watched her ex bristle, pride rising to meet the challenge. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to her. Not quickly, not urgently. He met her gaze as if the rest of the room no longer existed, as if the tension crackling around them was irrelevant compared to the fact that she was standing there, shoulders tight, hands clenched at her sides. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. The simplicity of the gesture stole her breath. He wasn't asking to intervene. He wasn't offering to fight her battles. He was offering her a choice. Her ex laughed again, sharper this time. "Don't tell me you're actually considering—" She didn't let him finish. Her fingers slid into the stranger's hand. The contact was immediate and grounding. His palm was warm, steady, his grip firm without being tight. It felt nothing like desperation or impulse. It felt deliberate. The effect was instant. Her ex's laughter cut off. His expression shifted. Not quite fear, but something uncomfortably close to it. He took a half step back without realizing he was doing it. The stranger finally looked at him again. "You should leave," he said quietly. "This is a private event," her ex snapped, grasping at authority. "You don't get to—" "I wasn't asking," the stranger replied. There was no threat in his voice. No anger. Just certainty. Around them, people pretended not to stare while doing exactly that. Phones slipped back into pockets. Glasses hovered midair. The atmosphere had changed so completely, it was almost physical. Her ex glanced around, searching for support. He found none. "You think you can just—" he started, then stopped. The stranger hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't tightened his grip on her hand. And yet her ex's confidence was crumbling. "Go," the stranger said again, softer this time. Something passed between the two men, something unspoken and deeply unsettling. Her ex swallowed hard, jaw tightening as if he'd bitten into something bitter. "This isn't over," he muttered, though the words rang hollow. The stranger said nothing. Her ex turned away, retreating toward the bar, toward noise and people and safety. The moment he disappeared into the crowd, the tension snapped like a string pulled too tight. The room exhaled. She hadn't realized how rigid her body was until the stranger's thumb brushed gently against the back of her hand. "You're shaking," he said quietly. She was. She let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for years. I didn't want to make a scene." "You didn't," he replied. "He did." She nodded, blinking rapidly, overwhelmed by the sudden absence of cruelty. The lights felt warmer now, the music less distant. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he angled his body just enough to shield her from the room, from curious eyes and lingering whispers. His presence wasn't loud or demanding. It was protective, in a way that felt instinctive, almost ancient. "You shouldn't have been spoken to like that," he said. "Not by anyone." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. Dark suit, sharp features, eyes that held stories she didn't want to guess at. A calm that felt earned, not practiced. "Who are you?" she asked. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile, exactly. More like a promise withheld. "Someone who noticed you," he said, and with that he gently guided her toward the center of the room, as if the world had already rearranged itself to make space for them. The first note of the music seemed to settle into the room like falling snow, soft, inevitable, impossible to ignore. She hadn't agreed out loud. She hadn't even nodded. And yet somehow, she found herself standing in the center of the floor, the stranger's hand firm at her waist, his other still holding hers, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. The Christmas lights overhead glittered, reflected in glass ornaments and champagne flutes, casting warm gold across his dark suit and her bare shoulders. For a moment, everything felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Her heart hammered. "I don't usually," she began, then stopped when his gaze lifted to meet hers. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just follow me." His voice wasn't coaxing. It wasn't demanding. It was certain. And against her better judgment, she let herself move with him as the slow rhythm wrapped around them. His hand guided her gently but decisively, turning her away from the edges of the room, away from the eyes she could still feel burning into her back. He positioned himself so that his broad frame blocked her ex from view, like a wall she hadn't known she needed. The closeness startled her. She could feel the heat of him, solid and steady, the subtle tension beneath his composure. He smelled faintly of something clean and expensive, with a sharper note beneath it, something darker. "You don't have to look anywhere else," he murmured. "Just here." She obeyed. The rest of the room faded into a blur of movement and murmurs. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, curiosity mixing with something close to awe. People pretended this was just another dance at a Christmas party, but no one truly believed that. This wasn't casual. This was a declaration. She became acutely aware of how carefully he moved her, how he adjusted when her step faltered, how he never once tightened his grip too much, or let it slacken. There was control in his touch, but it wasn't about ownership. It was about protection. Her pulse slowed, just a little. "I didn't ask your permission," she said softly, surprising herself. "You just took my hand." A corner of his mouth lifted. "I did ask, just not with words." She swallowed. The music swelled, rich and low, filling the space between them. Her cheek hovered near his shoulder, close enough to feel his breath warm against her skin. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone held her like this. Not rushed, not distracted, not conditional. Around them, eyes followed. She caught a glimpse of her ex over his shoulder. He stood rigid near the bar, drink forgotten, his confident smile completely gone. His gaze flicked between them, jaw clenched, disbelief written across his face. For the first time in a long time, she felt something shift inside her. Power. Not borrowed, not forced. Quiet and undeniable. "You're not laughing," she said quietly. "Why would I?" he replied. "Most people would be," she admitted. "This isn't exactly subtle." His eyes darkened slightly. "Subtlety has its place. Tonight isn't it?" The word sent a shiver through her. They turned slowly, the lights moving with them, casting shadows that danced along the walls. His hand never left her back, never drifted lower than it should, never claimed more than she was ready to give. but the intent was unmistakable. This wasn't just kindness. This was choice. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "You will," he said. She laughed softly despite herself, a sound she hadn't expected to make tonight. "That's not comforting." He leaned closer, his voice just for her now. "I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to make sure no one ever speaks to you like that again." Her breath caught. They moved together until the song began to fade, the final notes lingering in the air like a held breath. He slowed, then stopped, but he didn't let her go right away. The room erupted into awkward applause, clapping that felt more like relief than celebration. Her ex looked away. The stranger finally released her hand, but his gaze stayed locked on hers. "You did well," he said quietly. She blinked. "At dancing?" "At standing," he replied, and as the lights glittered overhead and the room buzzed with questions no one dared to ask, she realized something had changed. She hadn't just been saved from humiliation. She had been seen, and the man who saw her wasn't someone anyone in this room would dare cross. The longer they moved together, the more she felt it. Not just the warmth of his hand at her back or the steady rhythm guiding her steps, but the invisible pressure that seemed to bend the space around him. It was subtle, almost elegant, the way people adjusted without realizing it, how conversations quieted when he passed, how no one bumped into him, how even the air felt more careful in his presence. This wasn't charm. This was authority. She became acutely aware of it as the dance continued, slow and unhurried, as if time itself had agreed to give them room. His touch never strayed, never tightened beyond what was necessary, yet it carried weight. Each movement felt deliberate, controlled, as though he was capable of far more than he chose to show. Her pulse thudded louder in her ears. "You don't dance like someone who does this often," she said softly, trying to ground herself in conversation. His gaze remained on hers. "I don't." "Then how are you so good at it?" A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't soften his eyes. "Control translates." The answer unsettled her more than she expected. They turned again, and she caught sight of the room over his shoulder. People watched openly now, curiosity overriding politeness. No one interrupted. No one joked. It was as if an unspoken line had been drawn, and everyone understood where not to step. Her ex stood farther away now, speaking urgently to someone she didn't recognize, his earlier confidence gone. He glanced at them once more, then looked away quickly, as if afraid of being noticed. That, more than anything, made her chest tighten. "Who are you?" she asked again, more seriously this time. He didn't answer immediately. His thumb brushed lightly against the side of her hand, a small, grounding motion that sent a ripple through her. "Does it matter right now?" he asked. "It might," she said. "I can feel something. People don't look at you the way they look at other men." His jaw tightened slightly. "People look at me the way they're taught to." The words landed heavily. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since he'd stepped between her and her ex. "Are you dangerous?" His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something more honest. "Yes," he said. The admission was quiet, unapologetic. Her breath caught, a mix of fear and fascination twisting in her chest. "Then why help me?" "Because you didn't ask," he replied. "You didn't perform. You didn't beg. You stood there and took it until you couldn't anymore." Her throat tightened. He'd seen everything. Not just the moment, but the pattern. "That kind of strength," he continued, "is rarely noticed." They swayed gently, the music carrying them as if the floor itself approved. She was aware now of every detail. The faint scar along his knuckle, the way his gaze never lingered too long on anyone else. The stillness that suggested violence wasn't foreign to him, only controlled. She should have pulled away. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. "That man," he said quietly, eyes flicking toward where her ex stood, "will not bother you again." She looked up sharply. "You can't know that." "I do," he replied. The certainty in his voice sent a chill through her. followed by an unexpected sense of relief. "You didn't threaten him," she said. "I didn't need to." They slowed as the song drew to a close. His hand remained at her waist, anchoring her even as the final notes faded. "Listen to me," he said softly, leaning in just enough that only she could hear. "What you felt tonight, being small, being mocked, that ends here, with me or without me." Her heart stuttered. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied, "and I know what it looks like when someone tries to break another person for sport." The music stopped. Applause rippled through the room again, tentative and uncertain. He released her slowly, but the connection lingered, like a held breath that hadn't quite been exhaled. She realized then that this man didn't move through the world hoping to be liked. He moved through it expecting to be obeyed, and somehow, impossibly, he had chosen her to stand beside him, even if just for a moment. Dangerous or not, that realization changed everything. The moment his hand left her waist, the room seemed to exhale. Not with relief, but with caution. She felt it immediately. The subtle shift in energy, the way conversations resumed a little too carefully, laughter returning in lower tones, eyes darting in his direction before quickly looking away. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath while he touched her, afraid to interrupt something sacred or dangerous, or both. He stepped back just enough to give her space, but not distance. Not really. He was still there, a solid presence at her side, angled slightly toward her, as if daring anyone to try and reach her again. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her heart was still racing. "Yes. Thank you." He studied her for a moment, like he was deciding whether to stay or disappear without explanation. Then, with a small nod, he turned away, heading toward the bar at the far end of the room. And that was when she heard it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for her. It was a whisper, urgent, sharp, threaded with disbelief. "Do you know who that is?" She paused mid-step, fingers tightening around the stem of her empty glass. Another voice replied, hushed but unmistakably tense. "Are you serious? That's him." "Him who?" A pause. Then, "Don't say it out loud." Her pulse quickened. She drifted closer to the edge of the conversation, pretending to look at her phone, every sense suddenly alert. "That's Matteo DeLuca," someone murmured. The DeLuca. Her breath caught. The name hit her like a physical force. She knew it. Everyone did. Even people who pretended not to. It was the kind of name that lived half in rumor, half in headlines, spoken carefully, usually followed by a quick glance over the shoulder. Matteo DeLuca. The man people said controlled half the city's shipping routes, the one whose businesses never quite stayed in the same name long enough to be pinned down, the one connected to stories that never made it to court, to men who vanished, to deals that reshaped entire neighborhoods overnight. The Mafia boss no one ever saw coming until it was too late. Her stomach dropped. "That can't be him," another voice whispered. "What would he be doing here?" "Exactly," the first voice replied. "Which is why you don't stare, and you definitely don't talk to him unless he talks to you first." Her gaze lifted instinctively. He stood at the bar now, one elbow resting casually against the polished surface, posture relaxed, almost bored. He looked nothing like the monster people described. No shouting, no flashy entourage. Just a man in a dark suit, snowmelt still drying at the cuffs, quietly commanding space without trying. And she realized with a chill that had nothing to do with December, that everyone else in the room knew exactly who he was. Everyone except her. Memories clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The way her ex's face had drained of color, the sudden silence, the laughter that died the instant Matteo, God, his name felt dangerous just thinking it, had taken her hand. He hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't needed to, because fear already knew him. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrapped her arms around herself. She should have been afraid. She should have walked away the moment she realized the truth. Instead, something else settled in her chest, something heavier, more complicated. Understanding. That wasn't arrogance she'd felt in his touch. It was power. Controlled. Contained. Like a blade sheathed just beneath the surface. She watched as someone approached him at the bar, a senior manager from another department, judging by the suit and forced smile. The man said something she couldn't hear. Mateo turned his head slowly. Just that. The manager stiffened, nodded rapidly, and retreated without another word. Her skin prickled. She should leave. Now. Slip back into anonymity, into the safe invisibility she'd lived in for so long. But before she could move, Mateo glanced over his shoulder. His eyes found hers instantly. Not searching, finding. The look he gave her wasn't cold or calculating. It was intent, grounded, as if he already knew she'd heard, as if he was waiting to see what she would do with the truth. He crossed the room toward her, unhurried. Every step felt like it echoed. "You heard," he said softly when he stopped in front of her. It wasn't a question. She swallowed. Yes. A flicker of something crossed his face. Approval, perhaps. Or respect. "And you're still standing here." "I didn't know," she said. "About you." "I know. You could have let me walk away without ever telling me." "I could have," he agreed. "But you would have found out eventually." "And if I'm scared now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze softened, just a fraction. "Then you're smarter than most." She searched his face, looking for cruelty, for satisfaction, for the thrill of being feared. She found none of it. Only something steady, something watchful. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. "I stepped in tonight to stop someone else from doing that." Her heart pounded. "And now?" A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. "Now," Mateo DeLuca said, "you decide whether knowing my name changes how you see me." She realized then that the most terrifying part wasn't who he was. It was that, despite everything, she didn't want to let go of his hand. The mistake happened quietly. That was the most dangerous part of it. She didn't notice it at first, not until Mateo's hand tightened around hers just a fraction, his thumb pressing once against her knuckles in a silent warning. He had been listening to her, or at least appearing to, as she tried to explain that she should probably leave, that the party was almost over anyway, that she didn't want to cause trouble. Trouble, she was learning, didn't need an invitation. Mateo's gaze slid past her shoulder, his expression unchanged, still calm, still composed, but the air around him sharpened like the moment before glass shattered. "Don't turn around," he said softly. Her instinct screamed to do the opposite. "What is it?" she whispered. "Your ex," he replied. "He's trying to be brave." Her stomach dropped. Against her better judgment, she glanced sideways and saw him standing near the edge of the room, phone held low, screen glowing faintly. His posture was stiff, his jaw tight, eyes darting between Mateo and the exit as if calculating something reckless. She knew that look. It was the same one he'd worn every time he'd said something cruel just to feel powerful again. "He's filming," she said quietly. "Yes," Mateo agreed. "And sending." Her breath caught. Sending to who? Mateo finally looked at her then. Really looked. "That depends on how stupid he is." A chill crept down her spine. "I don't understand." "He thinks exposure is leverage," Mateo said calmly. "That if he captures the right moment, says the right thing, he becomes untouchable." Her ex shifted closer, emboldened by alcohol and resentment. His voice rose just enough to carry. "Smile for the camera," he said loudly. "Didn't think you'd upgrade to criminals, but I guess desperation does that to a woman." Several people nearby froze. No one laughed this time. Mateo sighed, not in anger, but in something closer to disappointment. "That," he murmured, "was the mistake." She felt it then, the shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sudden, unmistakable sense that something irreversible had just been set in motion. Mateo stepped forward, placing himself fully between her and the man who had once broken her heart. His back was straight, his movements unhurried, but there was a finality to the way he moved that made her blood run cold. "Delete it," Matteo said. Her ex scoffed. "Or what?" Matteo leaned in just enough that only the three of them could hear. "Or you'll spend the rest of your life wishing this was the only bad decision you made tonight." The words were quiet. Absolute. Her ex laughed nervously, but it rang hollow. "You don't scare me." Matteo's expression didn't change. "No. I terrify the people who come looking for you after." Silence fell like snow. The phone slipped from her ex's fingers, clattering to the floor. Matteo didn't touch him, didn't threaten again. He simply waited. Hands shaking, her ex bent down, picked up the phone, and deleted something, then showed the screen. "It's gone," he muttered. "I swear." Matteo nodded once. Then he turned away, the man already dismissed from his world. But the damage was done. She felt it as soon as Matteo's attention returned to her. Not anger. Concern. "You can't go home alone tonight," he said. Her heart stuttered. "What?" "He involved other people," Matteo continued. "That means you're no longer invisible." "I never wanted this," she said, panic rising. "I didn't ask for protection. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," he replied. "That's how it usually starts." She pulled her hand from his, wrapping her arms around herself. "So what now?" "Now," Matteo said gently, "you understand the cost." The room felt too small, too bright, too aware of them. "Being seen with me means people will assume things," he continued. "They'll test boundaries. They'll look for weaknesses. Not because you matter to them, but because you matter to me." The weight of that settled heavily in her chest. "That's not fair," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "It's reality." She looked up at him, eyes burning. "And what do you get out of this?" His gaze softened, just slightly. "Tonight? I get to make sure you walk out of here breathing." "And after tonight?" "That," he said, "depends on whether you walk away from me, or let me keep you safe." The word safe sounded different now. Not like comfort, like a contract. She realized then that protection from a man like Matteo DeLuca was never a gift. It was a door. Once opened, it never closed the same way again. The party unraveled slowly after midnight, like a dream losing its edges. People drifted toward the exits in small clusters, coats pulled tight, laughter subdued by the weather outside, and the tension that had never fully lifted after what happened. Someone turned down the music. Another began stacking glasses. The illusion of celebration gave way to something quieter, more fragile. Snow pressed against the tall windows in thick, swirling sheets. The city beyond reduced to blurred lights and white silence. She stood near the entrance now, her coat on, fingers curled around her bag strap as if it were an anchor. Her heart was still racing, though the danger had passed, or at least retreated into the shadows. Matteo stood a few steps away, speaking softly into his phone. The language was low, controlled, unfamiliar. Italian, she thought. His voice never rose, never hurried. Yet the man on the other end clearly understood every word carried weight. When he ended the call, he slid the phone back into his pocket and turned toward her. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. She blinked. "Is it that obvious?" "To me," he replied. Outside, a gust of wind drove snow hard against the glass. The doors rattled faintly. "I don't want to be part of this," she said, gesturing vaguely, meaning everything. Him, the power, the fear, the consequences. "I just wanted to survive a Christmas party without feeling small." "And instead," he said quietly, "you were seen." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if that was a good thing." Matteo stepped closer, but not too close. He never crowded her, never needed to. "It doesn't feel like it yet," he said. But it was. "Because now I need protection?" Her voice tightened. "Because my life just became complicated?" "Yes," he said honestly. "And because you learned something about yourself tonight." She looked up at him. "What?" That you don't disappear when someone tries to humiliate you. You endure, and when someone steps in, you don't shrink from the truth, even when it scares you. The words settled deep, uncomfortable in their accuracy. A silence stretched between them, heavy but not awkward. "I won't force you," Matteo said finally. "Not now. Not ever." She frowned. "You already said I can't just go back to normal." "Normal doesn't exist anymore," he replied, "but choice still does." She waited, snowlight flickering across his face. "You can walk out that door alone," he continued. "I will make sure no one follows you tonight. I will make sure your ex doesn't come near you again." "And tomorrow?" she asked. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tomorrow, I can't promise the world will forget what it saw." Her chest tightened. "And the other option?" "You let me keep protecting you," he said. Openly. Properly. Her pulse thudded. "Which means?" "It means drivers when it snows like this. It means men you don't see making sure you arrive home safely. It means people knowing you are under my protection." "And what do you get?" she asked again, quieter this time. Matteo met her gaze without flinching. "Peace of mind." She let out a small, incredulous laugh. "That's all?" "For now," he said. The doors creaked as someone else left, a rush of icy air spilling inside before sealing shut again. The storm outside showed no sign of easing. The city was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, watchful. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "my life changes." "Yes." "If I say no?" "Your life still changes," he replied, "just without me in it." She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She thought of the way her ex had smiled when he thought he had power. The way that smile had vanished. The way Matteo had stood between her and the worst parts of the room without raising his voice once. She thought of how it felt not to be alone. When she opened her eyes, Matteo was watching her with something like patience. Not expectation. Not entitlement. Respect. "I don't want to belong to your world," she said. "You wouldn't," he answered. "You'd remain yourself. I'd simply make sure the world behaves accordingly." Her heart skipped. Outside, snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, erasing footprints as fast as they were made. She took a breath. "Walk me to the door," she said. Matteo nodded and extended his arm, not possessive, not demanding. An offer. She hesitated only a second before taking it. The choice wasn't made yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever waited for her beyond that door, walking away from him would be the hardest step she'd taken all night. The snow had softened the city by morning. What had been sharp and glittering under streetlights the night before now lay quiet and pale, covering sidewalks and cars like a promise made gently instead of demanded. She stood by her apartment window, a mug of coffee cooling between her hands, watching the world move slower than usual, as if everyone had agreed to give the day space. Sleep had come in fragments. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ballroom lights, felt the weight of Matteo's hand at her back, heard the certainty in his voice when he'd said her life would change whether she wanted it to or not. The dance had ended hours ago. Its consequences had not. Her phone buzzed on the counter. One message, unknown number. "I hope you arrived home safely." She stared at the screen longer than necessary before typing back. "I did." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Good. That single word carried more care than any long message ever could. It unsettled her, comforted her, made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. She set the phone down and leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She could walk away now. Block the number. Return to routines and deadlines, and quiet evenings where nothing dangerous ever happened. But she knew herself better than that. The truth was, something had shifted the moment Matteo De Luca had taken her hand. Not because he was powerful, not because her ex had been humiliated, but because, in the middle of a room full of people, Matteo had looked at her like she mattered. Not as an accessory, not as a conquest. As a person. Her phone buzzed again. "There's a car downstairs." Her breath caught. "You didn't have to do that," she typed. "I know," came the reply. "I wanted to." She closed her eyes, weighing the choice one more time. The one he'd given her after midnight. The one she hadn't answered yet. The doorbell rang. She nearly laughed at how steady her hands were as she set the mug down and crossed the room. When she opened the door, the hallway was empty, but the elevator at the end stood open, and a man in a dark coat waited inside, posture respectful, eyes forward. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to take you wherever you need to go," he said. "Only if you wish. Only if you wish." The words echoed. She grabbed her coat. Downstairs, the city smelled like snow and possibility. The car was black, sleek, unmarked. Mateo wasn't inside, not waiting, not hovering, just offering. As the door closed behind her, she felt the final truth settle into place. The dance hadn't been an interruption in her life. It had been an invitation. To step out of the smallness she'd been taught to accept. To stop believing invisibility was safety. To understand that being seen, truly seen, was terrifying and transformative in equal measure. Her phone buzzed once more as the car pulled into traffic. "You don't owe me anything," Mateo wrote, "but I won't forget you." Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she typed, "Neither will I." The car moved through the quiet streets, snow crunching softly beneath the tires. She watched the city pass, knowing that no matter where this road led, toward him or away from him, she was no longer the woman who had almost skipped the party. She had danced, and that dance had rewritten the future in ways she was only beginning to understand.